thanks for everyone for giving up their afternoon to listen to this very important training today on the new child safe standards and how they'll impact on clubs. So what we're actually going to do today is that Grant is going to walk you through the standards, and then following that we'll take some questions, and then I'll give you a rundown on the way forward for not only the district but the club. These standards were introduced in July of this year. Since then, Grant and myself have been working on the policy and documents that we need to review from a district point of view to ensure that we satisfy the standards. These have been accepted by the district board. The district board has been trained together with the leadership team. And last week we did the first of the session for the clubs and club protection officers. So what I'll do now is introduce you to Grant Godino, who is our subject matter expert on these standards, and he'll run you through a presentation. Could I please ask everyone to put themselves on mute? If you have a question that you want, can you use the reactions button and use the hand there, and he will see that and know that there's a question for him. So over to you, Grant.
Thanks, David. Yes, so Grant Godino is my name. I'm a member of the Rotary Club of Traralgon, and before we begin, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we are all gathering today. They are many and varied, I would imagine. For most of us, that'll be the Gunai people. But for me today here sitting in Brunswick East, it's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. They've cared for the lands of this area for many, many years, from the Yarra River all the way through to the banks of the Merri Creek. And I appreciate their care for the land for many years. Some of the content that we'll talk about today can be a little heavy. So just as a quick reminder up front, we're going to talk about child safety and child abuse in a really general way today. We won't talk about specific examples, but it is important to recognise that these topics can be distressing for some people. So I just encourage you to reach out to any of the supports here if needed, and remember too that it's okay to step away from this presentation and come back if it is getting a bit heavy for you. Just a quick overview of what we'll talk about today. So I'm going to do a bit of an overview of the child safe standards, what they are, a little bit of history, and then a look at each one of them, and then talk about how the district's policies fit into all of those standards. So to start off with a quick definition, child safety includes matters related to protecting of all children from child abuse, mitigating the risk of child abuse, providing support to a child at risk of abuse, and responding to suspicions, incidents, disclosures, or allegations of abuse. Child abuse itself is any act committed against a child involving a sexual offence or grooming, inflicting physical violence or serious emotional or psychological harm on a child, or the serious neglect of a child. So that means it can include things like physical abuse, actual sexual abuse, grooming behaviours, experiencing family violence, emotional abuse, neglect, and any sort of sexual behaviour in children under 10 years is also considered a form of abuse. So it's quite a broad and varied definition that we're looking at, and we're working to protect children from in having these standards. So just as a really quick 1-minute history of the child safe standards, they're part of an evolving story of reform in Victoria to make sure that children and young people in organisations feel safe and are safe. Recent inquiries have shown that harm that organisation and its people can cause to children when the right processes and culture are not in place. It's an ongoing story and a maturing and an evolving of things over time. So they emerged from 2 inquiries. The original inquiry that introduced the child safe standards was the Victorian Betrayal of Trust Parliamentary Inquiry, and not long after that, Victorian Parliamentary Inquiry resulted in a Federal Royal Commission. And one of the things that that Royal Commission did was talk about the fact that Victoria's system was working really well and that we needed a broader national set of principles for child-safe organisations. So what happened was that in 2019, the Victorian government reviewed the standards and found really strong support for that national consistency. So in 2020, the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing updated the standards, and they focused on the best way to retain a really important concept around child empowerment that Victoria had set in place, include a really distinct focus on cultural safety for Aboriginal children and young people, and to also align the Victorian standards with the national principles. So for those of you that are close to the border, these standards will align nicely with those that are in New South Wales as well. Consultation happened in 2020 and 2021, and the standards were introduced, or the new set of standards, I should say, on the 1st of July 22. So we've needed to comply with these standards since the 1st of July 22. And our new child safe standards set by the Victorian government are based on those national principles. The key things to know that have changed from the old standards is looking at an increased involvement on families and children in child safety efforts. So it's one thing to have the policy in place. It's also very important to make sure children understand what it means. A focus on safety for Aboriginal children was something that was enhanced through the new standards, and better management of the risk of child abuse in online environments, and then making sure that there's governance and systems in place to protect children and keep children safe. So why are they so important? Well, Rotary as a child safe organisation has always had the best interest of children at heart. However, two major inquiries have shown us that good intentions are not enough when it comes to child safety. The Catholic Church, Scouts and all those other organisations that really got highlighted in the Royal Commission, they all had good intentions at heart as well, but it just wasn't quite enough. The child safe standards matter and are so important because they aim to keep every child safe and free from abuse. And the child safe standards recognise that all children are vulnerable. They require organisations like us to take steps to prevent child abuse and build a culture of child safety within the organisation. We can't just assume that child abuse doesn't or can't happen within our clubs and communities. It certainly can. And if we're not careful, and if we're not watching and doing the right thing all the time, that's when things can sort of sneak into place. So the standards aim to promote the safety of children, prevent child abuse, ensure effective processes are in place to respond and report all allegations of abuse. And they work by driving changes in culture. We have to embed child safety in everyday thinking and practice, and they provide a minimum standard of child safety. So there's a lot of things that we'll do above and beyond all of this that is just good practice. And they highlight that we've all got a role to play in this. So to have a bit of a think about each one of the standards, there's 11 of them now, up from the previous 8. They don't quite align to each other the way that, so it's not like you can say child safe standard 1 is the same as the old child safe standard 1. It doesn't quite work like that. But what I want to do in going through each one of these is just to give you a bit of an overview and a bit of a look at the things that we are doing as Rotarians to make sure that we meet these child safe standards. Some of the examples that we do in everyday practice, and others will be things that we need to start doing as well. So child safe standard 1 requires our clubs and programs to make sure Aboriginal children and young people feel safe and are safe in our activities and programs. It's important to note that the term Aboriginal includes all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and that this standard applies to us even if there's no children participating in our programs who have identified themselves as Aboriginal. They have to feel safe to be able to do that to begin with. So it's important to build that culturally safe environment straight up. It means that they can feel comfortable. They feel comfortable being themselves and expressing their culture and spiritual beliefs. And they are supported by people who respect their Aboriginality and encourage their sense of self and identity. So we've got a child safety and wellbeing policy that's been approved by the district and includes actions that we'll take to promote cultural safety in our community. And clubs and programs have a really important role to play in implementing these strategies to make sure that our organisation can be culturally safe. Some of the things that could include would be acknowledging country at the start of meetings and programs, having a sign or some sort of plaque that acknowledges traditional landowners as they enter your meeting or program locations, engaging with elders as we're designing new programs to make sure that we've got Aboriginal child safety up front in our minds, and undertaking cultural awareness training before running programs for children, and having local Aboriginal people and elders be guests at club meetings could even be an action that we take to promote that cultural safety. I think it's also important to note on that one too, most of us are in Gippsland, and Gippsland actually has one of the biggest Aboriginal populations across Victoria. So as an organisation, we can be doing a lot more to build that cultural safety. Child Safe Standard 2 starts to think about leadership, governance and culture. So it emphasises the vital role that leaders and governing authorities have in establishing a culture where child abuse and harm isn't tolerated, and that we've got effective systems and processes to implement policies and practices to manage the risk of child abuse. All of you as club leaders, as presidents, as district protection officers, as people that run some of our programs have a role to play here. And many failures identified by the Betrayal of Trust Inquiry and also the Royal Commission were the result of poor leadership, governance and culture, and included leaders that failed to act or were complicit in covering up child safety complaints, governance structures that didn't have oversight or review mechanisms, and cultures that put adult offenders or organisational reputation above children's safety. So we've got to take really deliberate steps to promote child safety and wellbeing and to protect children, and to highlight that it's everyone's responsibility. That culture of child safety is driven by people like you and is supported by effective systems and processes. And when child safety and wellbeing is embedded, we are a better organisation to keep children safe. So making sure that all your club members, that especially those that are working with children, know about our policies and procedures, doing a bit of an introduction into child safety before you run a program that will include children. All of those things are really important to make sure that they know what they need to do. They immediately raise concerns and they're proactive in managing the risk around child safety. Standard 3 looks at child empowerment and Standard 4 looks at family engagement. So Standard 3 looks at the culture and values that promote child safety and make sure that young people are empowered and know about their rights. It includes recognising the importance of friendships. It includes enabling children to participate in a culture that's safe, and also includes delivering age-appropriate sexual abuse prevention programs. And we rely on schools to be able to do that for us. There's a wonderful program called Respectful Relationships that are really teaching kids a lot of this stuff. A key action for us in implementing this particular standard around child empowerment is making sure that children and young people know who to speak to if they've got a concern or they feel unsafe. So if you're running a program just for children, letting them know, hey, this is Johnny over here. Johnny's a counsellor and Johnny's the person that you need to speak to if you don't feel safe, if you need someone to talk to. And Standard 4 looks at making sure we've got an open and transparent culture of child safety for families and communities. So making sure that they can access information around child safety. Keeping them informed means that they know how to keep their children safe and that their children are safe in our programs. It might even include district board reaching out for assistance every couple of years to have a bit of a chat about how these standards are going and how these policies are going and if we need to make any changes. Standard 5 looks at diversity and equity. It's about creating environments where children and young people feel safe and welcome regardless of their circumstances and attributes. So it recognises that children and young people have unique abilities, skills and life experiences, just like all of us, and acknowledging that difference in backgrounds, personality and beliefs shape how a child experiences the world and the needs and wants that they have. It's fundamental to acknowledge that we have to know about those differences to support child safety and wellbeing. RI's commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion helps us to comply with this standard. There's some wonderful resources on the RI website that have a look at what diversity and equity means and some of the things that we can do within our clubs and programs to really promote diversity and equity. And that could include things like regularly checking in with vulnerable participants. It could include students with disabilities. It could include youth exchange students who are coming from overseas where the culture might be a bit different. It could include making sure that if you know that you've got a trans child in a program, introducing people with pronouns. So just making sure we're doing the things that we need to do to make people feel safe and welcome. Child Safe Standard 6 looks at suitable members and volunteers, focuses on ensuring that people in our organisation and who work with children and young people are suited and supported to act in a child-safe way. And selecting the right people to work with children is vital to protect children from harm. Part of this standard, we need to ensure that the Rotary Youth Volunteer Information and Declaration forms are completed by all members before your club or program conducts activities with children and young people, and ensure that appropriate records are maintained and submitted to district. It also means the strengthening of the existing practices, and it means that any clubs that don't submit this information will find themselves non-compliant with the district's policies, and will mean that we can't have you participating in activities with children and young people that are organised by the district. So getting those forms in place is really important to make sure that you can support the children and young people in your communities. And when we ensure that people working with children and young people are suitable and supported to reflect child safety and wellbeing, we all work together to keep children safe. Child Safe Standard 7 looks at organisations having complaints processes that are child-focused, culturally safe and accessible to everyone. So it looks at having a complaints handling process that's focused on children and their safety and needs, one that takes child safety concerns seriously, responds promptly and thoroughly, identifies and responds to all forms of child abuse and reports those through to authorities. It also recognises that complaints are more likely to be raised when there's clear, well-communicated policies and procedures. It helps young people feel safe because they and their families know who to speak to when something isn't quite right. RI's done a lot of work in strengthening our complaints process, so it's a bit of a sort of three-tiered approach now. One where, of course, the club and the district is always first and second, and then the RI program and club support staff have been provided with a whole heap of training and support to be able to escalate some of those complaints that come through. So there's a great complaints policy that supports this standard on our website as well. Child Safe Standard 8 focuses on building child safety knowledge, skills and awareness in leaders, members and volunteers. So program committees and people working with children have to undertake appropriate training about child safety at least annually. And that training needs to include identifying indicators of child abuse and harm, including when it's caused by other children, how to respond to issues of child safety, including internal and external reporting requirements, notifying families and carers and managing risk to children, how to support a person disclosing harm, and how to create culturally safe environments within the organisation. This provides members and volunteers with the knowledge and skills that they need to create a culture of child safety. So today's training session is one example of how we're responding to this standard. And clubs can also assist us in complying with this standard by asking all club members working with children to complete a module on the Rotary Learning Centre called Protecting Youth Program Participants, or presenting a PowerPoint presentation that can be provided by David and the district team. Child Safe Standard 9 looks at child safety in physical and online environments. We all need to, so this standard is is generally not one that we have to do a lot with, thankfully, because most of the time when we're working with children and young people, the physical environments are designed for them. We're usually going to a school camp, or we're going to, you think about where Moona is held at Nossal. All those environments are already child safe because they're organisations where children are attending all the time. So making sure that we've got an awareness of the fact that an environment where we might be bringing children into is safe is what this standard's all about. Child Safe Standard 10 looks at the review of child safety practices. It outlines how organisations implementing this standard have an open and transparent culture, learn from their mistakes, and put the interests of children first. So district will review our child safety policies, every 2 years or after there's been an incident. And similarly, Child Safe Standard 11 acknowledges that being a child safe organisation requires ongoing effort. And also looks at the fact that clubs and program participants need to have input in that review and that implementation, and that there's a commitment to share the outcomes of any reviews that occur. So thinking a little now about the consequences of not complying with the child safe standards. So there's a number of serious consequences for failing to comply with the standards. Firstly, non-compliance could foster a culture where we have an environment that is not safe for children, and that it doesn't encourage reporting. So you think about some of those organisations in the past where there have been child safety incidents. There hasn't been that culture there. There hasn't been that idea that we have to think about children and their protection first up, as opposed to reputational damage or something like that. The non-compliance is serious and ongoing. Action can be taken by the Commission for Children and Young People. They're the regulators of this of the standards, and also creates legal risks such as breach of duty of care obligations. Criminal offences of failure to report and failure to protect, which we'll talk about in a minute, might also apply if there's an environment that's not safe for children and abuse is not prevented or reported. Environment that is not safe for children may also result in legal action like negligence claims. And the one that I put last, and I put last on purpose, is that it still is a consideration, but the safety of children is paramount, needs to come first. But it also impacts an organisation's reputation when they're not doing the right thing to protect children and young people. So having a think now and changing tack a little to think a little bit about the policies and procedures that we as a district have in place to protect children. So this slide's a bit of a visualization of how it all fits together. The slide, the boxes there in pink are our 4 overarching child safety policies and procedures. So these 4 policies and procedures are specifically child safety focused and are directly related to the child safe standards. And we'll go through each one of those in a minute. The ones in blue that I won't touch on in too much detail today are a range of other district and RI policies and procedures that have important things to say about child safety, but they're really only child safety related. So our complaints policy talks about how to raise a complaint, but isn't necessarily only about raising a child safety complaint. Our volunteer policy, again, is the policy around the volunteers that we have and the safety considerations that need to be in place before having a volunteer be involved. Bullying and harassment policy has been around for a while, looks at bullying and harassment, but again, is broader than children. We've got a privacy policy. RI's got their commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and then all of the governance documents as well. So I won't go over those in much detail today, but they have an important overlap when you think about the child safe standards. So the first policy that I want to quickly talk about is our child safety and wellbeing policy. This policy demonstrates our commitment to providing environments where children are safe and feel safe, where their participation is valued, their views respected, and their voices are heard about decisions that impact their lives. Every person involved in our organisation has an important role to play in promoting child safety and wellbeing and promptly raising issues or concerns about child safety. This policy, I don't think it is yet, but will very soon be publicly available on our website. It tells the community about the strategies and the things that we have in place to keep children safe. It outlines how we establish a culturally safe environment to respond to diverse needs. And it helps us create a shared commitment to keeping children safe. It supports everyone in our community to know their responsibilities. Second document I'll touch on is the Code of Conduct. It's a district-wide code of conduct that applies to all adults that work or volunteer in our clubs and districts. The Code of Conduct provides adults with clear guidance on the behaviour that's expected of them. And it lists behaviours that are acceptable and behaviours that are unacceptable. You can see an example of some of the unacceptable behaviours that it lists on the slide there. It applies to all activities conducted by club and district, including meetings and not just those connected with children. And the full code also outlines expectations of members both working with children and working with other adults. And it's based on a code of conduct that RI put together that also acknowledges diversity. They're really great code of conduct that they put together that helped us comply with this standard, or to put this code of conduct together, I should say. Perhaps one of the most important of those overarching documents is the Child Safety Responding and Reporting Obligation Policies and Procedures. That policy makes it clear that we must not ignore or disregard any concerns, suspicions, or disclosures of child abuse or harm. It outlines what to do when we have a concern about a child's safety, and acknowledges that as a Rotary member, you've got a vital role in protecting children from harm and are well placed to observe signs of or behaviours that may indicate risks of child abuse. So basically, if you've got any concerns about a child's safety or any inappropriate behaviours of adults or children in Rotary programs and activities, and even if you're not sure, tells you have to take them seriously. The policy helps us to comply with 3 separate legal requirements that are here. So the 2 offences that are listed on the left there form the basis of our requirement to report. There's a subtle difference between these requirements, which apply to everyone, and the mandatory reporting requirements on the right that are only acceptable to certain professions. So the failure to disclose offence says that we have to make a report to Victoria Police usually, but it could also be child safety organisations, a reasonable belief that a sexual offence has been committed by an adult against a child under 16. So reasonable belief are the important words there. You don't actually have to do any investigation. You don't have to confirm whether or not something's happened. Just that you believe something has happened means that everybody must report. The failure to protect offence looks at people in positions of authority. So all of you as club presidents, as district chairs, as club protection officers, this would apply to you. And it's the legal requirement to protect children associated with Rotary from adults who pose a risk of sexual abuse. So if we haven't done all of the things around screening up front, if we haven't done things like checking that people have working with children checks, we could find ourselves in a bit of strife when we look at this failure to protect offence. These are both criminal offences. Mandatory reporting, on the other hand, has a really subtle difference, but important difference, which is why it only applies to the people that are listed on the screen there. And that's to form a reasonable belief that a child is in need of protection. So reasonable belief is still there, but we're looking at a child needing protection as opposed to a sexual offence having occurred. So 2 really important and subtle differences there. Record keeping is also an important element of our child safety responding and reporting policies. So clubs and programs must ensure that children's information is recorded, kept accurate and secure at all times. Record decisions made, actions taken, and notes of any meetings and important conversations that talk about the safety of individual children. Make sure that records are complete, accurate, and can be understood in the future by those that were not directly involved, and protect records from unauthorized access and disclosure. So if you have had an offence or someone's declared that there has been sexual abuse or a child's come to you, it's about maintaining and keeping those records. You must pass all those records relating to child safety, health and wellbeing to the district protection officer if you've had to make them. They can't be disposed or destroyed before you've done that. If you need any clarification about your information sharing and record keeping obligations, then you can reach out to David as the district protection officer. Similarly, if there's any requests from organisations to share information, which can sometimes happen if Victoria Police or Child Protection come involved, it's the district that will choose to share those in appropriate situations. That's why you've got to pass them on. Before this video starts, I'm just going to go pause for a second. So one of the training requirements is understanding signs of abuse. So this little video that I've got here is a wonderful resource that the Department of Education put together that looks at some of the signs of abuse. Goes for about 7 minutes. Let me know if the sound doesn't come through and I'll put it on. It does talk about schools in the wording of the video, but it's still a really important learning around the signs of abuse.
Hi again, and welcome to the section on identifying signs of abuse. Dane and I are going to look at the types of abuse and the common signs of abuse. You can check out the fact sheet or read through the text on the website if you need more detail.
So Willa, as you said earlier, as a school staff member, we play a really critical role in identifying abuse. For some kids, we might be the only people in their lives that are in a position to identify and report signs of abuse.
That's right, which is why it's really important that we know what we're looking for.
Willa, do you know which children are the most likely to be abused?
Any child can be abused, but children who are vulnerable, isolated or have a disability are much more likely to become a victim of abuse.
There are lots of forms of abuse too, aren't there? There is physical abuse, sexual abuse, grooming, emotional or physiological harm, neglect, and family violence.
Yeah, that's right. Let's look at each of them.
Physical child abuse can consist of any non-accidental infliction of physical violence on a child by any person. Examples of physical abuse may include beating, shaking or burning, assault with implements, and female genital mutilation.
Child sexual abuse is when a person uses power or authority over a child to involve them in sexual activity. It does not always involve physical contact or force. For example, talking to a child in a sexually explicit way or showing them pornography.
Sometimes a child may be manipulated into thinking that they brought the abuse on themselves, or that the abuse is an expression of love through a process of grooming.
That's right. Grooming is when a person engages in predatory conduct to prepare a child for sexual activity at a later time. Grooming can include communicating and or attempting to befriend or establish a relationship or other emotional connection with the child or their parent or carer.
Emotional abuse occurs when a child is repeatedly rejected, isolated, or frightened by threats, or by witnessing family violence. It can include things like derogatory name-calling and put-downs, to the extent that the child suffers or is likely to suffer emotional or psychological harm to their physical or developmental health.
Neglect includes a failure to provide the child with an adequate standard of nutrition, medical care, clothing, shelter or supervision to the extent that the health or physical development of the child is significantly impaired or placed at serious risk. Neglect may not immediately compromise the safety of the child and can also result in longer-term cumulative harm. Family violence is behaviour towards a family member that may include physical violence or threats of violence, verbal abuse, emotional or psychological abuse, sexual abuse, and financial and social abuse.
The signs that a child is being abused might be different depending on the type of abuse, right, Willa?
Yes, and there is a breakdown of the typical signs of each form of abuse on the website. But let's run through some critical physical and behavioural signs to look out for all forms of abuse. Here is a list of the common physical indicators.
So looking at this list, we should definitely be on the lookout for bruises and welts, internal injuries and injury to genitals, wearing unsuitable clothes to hide injuries, STDs, being consistently unwashed, hungry and having unattended health problems.
That's right. The best rule of thumb is to err on the side of caution. If something doesn't seem right and you suspect that a child may be being abused, then you should act by following the 4 critical actions. Here is the list of common behavioural indicators.
There are some easy to identify indicators here too, like if you see drawings or writing from a student which depicts abuse, or if there is persistent sexual activity which is inappropriate for their age,
Or if they have an unusual fear of physical contact with adults, or possess expensive gifts, or have unusually close connection with an older person.
I'm guessing that there are also signs that an adult may be perpetrating abuse too.
Definitely.
So we should be on the lookout for any relationship between a family member and child, or a staff member or other adult and child that makes us feel uncomfortable too.
Yes. Within the family, we should look for overprotective or volatile relationships and a child's reluctance to be alone with a family member. With other adults, including school staff members, we should look out for signs of inappropriate touching and social boundaries, like bringing up sexual or very personal detail in conversation, giving of gifts, and attempts to be alone with a child.
It says that adults may also try to undermine a child's reputation so no one will believe them about the abuse.
That's right.
So what we've learnt is that there are different forms of abuse. There are a range of common physical and behavioural indicators that a child may be being abused, and a range of signs that an adult is perpetrating abuse.
And most importantly,
if you form a reasonable suspicion that a child is being abused or is at risk of abuse, or an adult is perpetrating abuse, even if you're not sure, you must
follow the 4 critical actions.
I always find that ending a little bit cheesy. But what are the 4 critical actions? Well, these are the 4 critical actions. So I suppose there's a bit of a summary of the child safety responding and reporting obligations, policies and procedures. 1, we have to respond to the emergency. If the child's at immediate risk of harm, you have to ensure their safety. 2, as soon as immediate health and safety concerns are addressed, you must report your concerns to the district protection officer or district governor. They then will give you advice on who to report to next, where to go to next. Unless it's an emergency, of course, you'd be going straight to the police in that case. And that will also trigger a couple of other reporting requirements that we've got up to RI and a few other places. 3, after that report's been made, you'll receive advice on contacting parents or carers. The district governor or the district protection officer will decide who needs to be contacted, when and why. And part 4 is to provide support. The district and any other supporting clubs will determine the support for children impacted by abuse in consultation with the authorities. So as a bit of a summary to today's presentation, some important things to remember. Child safety and wellbeing is everyone's responsibility. Everyone working with children has a responsibility to always follow our child safety and wellbeing policies and procedures, act in accordance with our code of conduct, identify and raise concerns about child safety issues, ensure children's views are taken seriously and their voices are heard, implement inclusive practices that respond to the diverse needs of children and families, and to participate in child safety and wellbeing induction and training. We all share a commitment to keeping children safe, and we've seen throughout this presentation that everyone has a vital role to play in building inclusive and safe environments where there's a strong culture for child safety. If you've got any questions at any time about the policies and procedures, you can always talk to David, but there's also an opportunity to ask any questions that you have now. Sounds like a no, David. Over to you.
Okay. While you're thinking of questions, I might just cover off on the way forward. So what we as a district will do next is that we're going to update our website so that we have a public and a private section for the documentation. Currently, all our documentation just sits in the area where it can only be accessed by Rotarians. So we're going to have a separate tab so that the public can access the documents that they need to refer to. And I'll be working with David Button to ensure that that gets on the site. And then the other forms, etc., that clubs will need, they will be in the member section. What I probably need to just specify now is that the Victorian Child Safe Standards apply to all youth programs, projects, activities and interactions that we have with youth or children. This is not a Rotarian or a Rotary action. This is an actual state law. So we, unfortunately, as Rotarians, need to abide by that. So part of the standard calls for members that are having any activities that involve youth or children, that they must be screened. And the screening process for the district is the Working with Children card and the completion of the Rotary Volunteer Declaration, which has got the 3 referees on it and signed, and is provided to your club protection officer, signed off by your president. The second part is the volunteer register. You must keep a register of the information on your members that have those in place with the Working with Children and the volunteer declarations. And you need to provide that to me at least annually or whenever it changes. So as you're updating it for new information, you copy it through to me. The other thing that I'm sure we'll get the question is, so what do we do with members that are not screened? The District Governor and I have been discussing this, and together with the insurance officer, we have determined that those people can have no contact, one-on-one contact, and you as a club will need to ensure that you have a risk management plan in place to ensure that those people don't have any contact, and you need to document that and keep it. The other thing that you must do is that in your projects, when you're having a project that has got youth involved, your sign-on, sign-off sheet should have a section there where you're ticking to ensure that those members have been screened. If they haven't been screened, they should not be involved in the project. One other thing that that District Governor Paul and I discussed is the importance of every club officer, so that's directors, presidents, etc., that they be screened. And apart from demonstrating a good example to the club, it also ensures that there will not be a person that will influence the reporting of a particular instance. The other question that comes up is incidental contact at say, for instance, a Bunnings barbecue. That your people there don't need to be screened for a Bunnings barbecue because you're not actually undertaking an activity which is directed at youth or children. Having said that, if you're actually running a program which is specifically designed for youth or children, anyone that's involved in that needs to be screened, and we need to be satisfied that the standards have been met. The training, the training that's on the Learning Centre is really good, and members can complete that, and at the end of it they can actually print off a certificate to say that they have actually completed the training, and I suggest that you keep that as a record in your club to identify that that training has occurred. I will also be providing an executive summary. It'll go out under Paul's signature, which will summarise all the documents, where they are, the links, etc., in one document, so that you've got it there. If you have any queries, questions, please don't hesitate to either send an email or phone me, and I'll try to endeavour to answer those. So that's probably about it from me, unless there's any specific questions that you want to pass to either myself or Grant. Alfonso.
Look, just a very quick question concerning the training.
The training?
The online training. Are you recommending that every member, every Rotary member should do that training and get a certificate?
Definitely.
Yeah.
It also covers off on a lot of other issues, including equity, inclusion, or diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, well, I'm with you, but the obvious objection that we will get is from people that say, well, you know, we're not going to be involved with children anyway. I mean, we hardly ever run any programs that are child related. So where's the problem? So how do you respond to that?
So like David said, it is a recommendation. I think that's the key.
Yeah.
I think in terms of child safe standards compliance, if we bring it to that level for a second, if a member was working directly with a child and wasn't trained, then there would be a problem. Yeah. But I think also a key part of this too is acknowledging that culture of child safety that we should be drawing. So yes, you're never going to get 100% compliance, but you do your damnest to make sure that everybody knows that it's an expectation and that we want to set that really positive culture around keeping kids safe. I think that's the important message that it sends. And the other quick thing too is that I flicked some slides to David that are a very, very condensed version of this training today that you can run with your clubs as well. So if it's not that online module that is very, very good, there's a PowerPoint option for you as well.
Yeah. The other thing with this is that I know that some of the pushback will be from the older members that are not all that familiar with, you know, how to get a Working with Children card online. And so what I suggest there is that you get some of the younger, more computer literate people to work with them, to work it through. As far as the volunteer declaration goes, I'm not quite sure what the problem would be. One of the referees can be a Rotarian, and you're picking the other two. So not quite sure what the resistance will be. You know, we're supposed to be a highly ethical organisation. So, you know, this is just another way of demonstrating that we support child safety.
Just as an example to that and the importance of those reference checks, because I think that's a bit of an element that's missing. So my day job is delivering this training and supporting schools to comply with the child safe standards. And we had an incident recently in Wonthaggi where there was a teacher that had been moving between different schools a bit more often than teachers normally would. And a couple hadn't asked child safety screening questions about that teacher to their previous employers. The third school that had this person did, And the response that they got was, yeah, we have a concern. We've reported it through to employee conduct, but nothing was substantiated, which didn't mean that that principal wouldn't hire that person, because they still had to. Merit comes into play and they were still the best person interviewed for the job. But it changed the way that that principal was supervising them. And that's what the key to this is. It's looking at that supervision, that okay, something's not quite right. Someone said something's up here. I'm going to watch a little differently. And what happened with that teacher was that some examples of grooming were noticed because that supervision had changed. That grooming was reported to VicPol, and they found that that teacher had actually been abusing children at the previous 2 schools. And it wouldn't have happened if they didn't ask those screening questions. So you just never know. Even if someone's got a VIT registration, even someone's got a working with children check, it's not always the be all and end all. And it's a lot of really great sort of improvements that can be made out of asking those questions.
Yeah, which is, there's another point that I need to make here, and that is around the working with children card. It needs to be issued for Rotary or Rotary noted on it. So for instance, we got the teacher's registration. You need to get them to also note that they are volunteering in Rotary. And the reason why you do that is that if anything happens, they will go back to the people that have instigated the card. So for instance, Rotary it's important that where it's not specifically for your Rotary club, that you ask them to have it noted. That way we'll get advice if anything happens, in particular if the card is cancelled or there is an offence of some sort.
Barry's just popped a question into the chat around national police checks. Barry, I think it's important to that checks for a different thing. Checks for the thing that it wouldn't check for on a working with children check would be issues around fraud and corruption, for example.
So who was that, Barry, was it?
Yeah. So I think that it depends on the risk and the sort of activities that you're doing with children. When I'm talking to schools about that, if we're thinking about doing really specific activities with children that are at higher risk, disengaged, refugee communities, all that sort of stuff, that's when those sort of check levels increase. It's probably a good idea to chat to David if you're doing something that you think might be particularly risky.
Youth exchange is one where we do police checks on not only the host families, the counsellor, etc. And that is because of the involvement that we have. But most of the other programs we have are fairly short in duration. The other thing that I must warn you is that the Working with Children card is a state-based thing. And you won't, and unfortunately they don't share information state to state. So if someone has an offence in another state, the Working with Children card won't necessarily pick it up in this state. But you would hope that by talking to the references that you'll get a feel as to whether or not there's an issue. Barry, you got a question?
Yeah, you just said what I just posted the messages. Then Working with Children cards only check your Victorian state background, and you just said the same thing. I was aware of that, and that's why I'm surprised. See, most businesses, including my own, we always do national police checks, so that covers that. So I'm just surprised that it's not done. We don't do it.
I mean, we have enough trouble getting the 2 documents that.
I know we do, because we've got 3 in our club that have got Working with Children, but they won't sign the work. They won't fill out the Working with Children, so we can't have them working with children, unfortunately. But even though they, highly regarded members, and they've been in Rotary for 30 odd years, but the thing is that I'd like to go one step further. To be totally honest, for the children's sake, I just don't believe the Working with Children card is enough.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we would need to get every Rotary district in Australia to agree to that, and That'll be like herding cats.
Well, the way I see it, it's
Already
just
is.
common sense.
Yeah. Again, one of the things I think you can stress
Sorry,
to
guys, I have to
the
leave.
members that are reluctant to complete these things is that the only person that knows what's on the declaration and the response from the referees is the club protection officer, and the president signs off on it. There's a copy of that goes to the district secretary only for archiving, and it will never be accessed unless there is a complaint, and then it will only be accessed by the district governor of the day. So there's complete privacy there in respect of that information. So that if that's one of the concerns around privacy, I think that, you know, you can satisfy them by telling them that.
Great. Thanks, David. That's good to know.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, I have to leave.
That's all right.
Thanks very much.
Is there any other questions? If there isn't, I might thank Grant for his presentation today, and thank you all for giving up your time. And then as I said, if you have a question or you're intending to run a program, please contact me and we'll walk through the thing.